Hello, hello. Thank you everyone for being here today. We're so fortunate to get to talk to Rachel Bowdler, the author of Safe and Sound, a suspense thriller that frankly it's not a genre that I know too well, but it was a book that I could not put down. And I think the fact that it was a novella worked perfectly for me to introduce me to the subject. And it really, I think suspense is the right terms, thrillers are the right terms, because I really couldn't put it down. It was the case of for a story, I felt so attached to the characters. I felt so intrigued about what was going to happen. And even until the end, I really didn't know. Like there were moments where I was like, ooh, they're gonna do it, but then things
Mhm.
change. And I think that idea that it really is all up in the air until the last moment is so underrated. So thank you so much again for being here. We can't wait to hear more about your story and kind of what inspired you to write this and the journey behind it.
Yeah, thank you for having me. I'm excited.
So when I reviewed Safe and Sound, I called it hot sweet tea for the soul, which I think sums it up well. It was a really uplifting story. It had definite moments of like comfort, coziness, romance, nothing too spicy. Nice closed door moments. But more than that, I think tension, like Ryan said, tension's what underlied everything, whether it was romantic tension between two characters or the tension of not knowing what's going to happen next. So I'd like to start out, Rachel, by finding out like how much of your DNA as an author is romance and how much is thriller, depending on like where you get your ideas from.
I would say about 90% of my DNA is romance. I started with like fantasy, but any genre that I've written, it's mostly been about the romance, and the rest is kind of surrounding it rather than an intrinsic part of it. Um, yeah, but I do love high stakes. I love characters being at their very worst and at their very best and having to kind of struggle through things. I think it can add a lot to the characters individually, but as in the romance as well. So I always enjoy
Yeah, I feel like
diving into.
the thriller elements added to the romance added to the thriller element. A good thriller, I think, hinges on the level of peril that the characters are in, and you don't really get anything out of that unless you care about the characters.
Mhm. Yeah.
So, given that I'm the one usually who reaches out to authors and I do a lot of the reading, I reached out to you when I was about halfway through. I'd read most of the book in one day and basically extracted from you a promise that these delicate little cotton balls were not going to be harmed or hurt, that they were going to be happy
Yeah.
in the end.
Yeah.
So when you and I spoke briefly about endings and how we like our endings, and I think you've got exactly what I like, which is awful amounts of tension and horror and not knowing whether it's going to be okay, but you won't let us down. Everything works out okay in the end.
Yeah.
Is that something that you want in the media you consume as well, like in the things that you read and watch and listen to?
I think it really depends. More than anything, I want a satisfying ending. I'm kind of okay with certain media confronting the fact that not everything ends on a happy ever after. But for me, as
Yeah.
a queer person, a queer reader, and a queer author, it's always nice to get that in our media because it's not something historically that we've had a lot of in the past. There's a lot of sad queer stories, but very few
Yeah.
are more happy. So anything that kind of gives us that resolution and that proof that it's gonna be okay
Yeah.
is good for me. Yeah.
That's a really good point. I didn't know a lot of these terms until I looked into it and found out that there are entire communities out there who all the romance stories for them just end in death, horror. No one ever
Mhm.
gets a happy ending.
Yeah,
It's nice to be the change that you want to see in the world.
absolutely. Yeah. And I'm very privileged to be able to do it.
Yeah, that's really cool. So more involved in the story. I wanted to know in your head. So Gen Y, the band that Ruby is in, are they obviously they're not a real band, but who are they in your head? Who are they most like?
Ooh, I guess any kind of rock band or alternative band I was channeling. I don't think I based them off any band in particular. Um, but but I was thinking maybe like a band like Paris that has a more female-led vocalist side.
Paris are good, yeah. I know
Yeah. But it's not something I really consciously thought of when I was going into it. And I guess that's why I was interested in it as well, because there's a huge amount of rock star romances out there with male leads, and but it was nice to have a badass woman going at it instead.
Yeah, absolutely. I really love Ruby and Shay's character. They totally, like, obviously they carried the show. It's all about them. It's them on the cover.
Yeah.
So going off the same idea about which band it would be, I think in my head, I always imagined they sounded like The Gossip or something, but maybe that's just me reading into it.
I've never heard of
something
them.
kind of like thrashy alternative kind of thing.
Yeah.
But more visually speaking, do you have an idea in your head if you were to cast Ruby or Shay, who they would be? Who would play them?
Ooh. Oh, that's gonna take a lot of thought.
You're going for it today. I love this.
Yeah, that's a lot of
these are the things I thought about when I was reading it. This is all from my notes. I was like, oh, because I think, who did I have in my head? Ruby in my head was almost like Hayley Williams, Paramore kind of.
Yeah. I mean, she's a plus size woman, so automatically it's a bit harder to cast her anyway, but Hayley Williams is a good shout. Yeah.
And Shay, whilst being very Irish in my head, I think in my head I had her as a redhead and then found out she was blonde.
Yeah.
If I'd looked at the cover, because I was reading it on Kindle, I would have read that as well.
It's interesting how people draw different interpretations from a character, though. So I try not to like sprinkle in too much physical description and keep reminding people of it, because if you want to imagine her a different way, then that's good with me.
That's a good point.
I think I do the same in most of my own writing, where I'll describe the character kind of briefly, broadly once in broad strokes, and then, because most of the time when I'm reading, I'll read the character's name and decide what they look like based on that, and then that's it locked in my head.
Yeah. I find it difficult to kind of conjure images as I'm writing anyway, so all of that is just a little bit superficial just for me, because I can't like physically imagine them as real people, even though they feel very real to me. It's more of like an abstract thing for me.
Oh, that's interesting. I've got a writer friend on Twitter who has aphantasia, where she doesn't imagine things visually at all. And I write mostly quite visual descriptions of things, and it was interesting hearing her take on my writing from a completely different perspective, one that I hadn't really considered. Do you find that changes the kind of stuff that you want to write, or that you do write? Given that you're like a more word-based author, I guess, like a more prose-based author.
Yeah, I guess I'm very focused on more like the feelings and the atmosphere than anything else. But I do use like the Pinterest boards to kind of inspire the visual aspects as well, because I do love like the physical description in other books. I love feeling like I'm in the setting, so it's something I consciously try to continue to add in. It's just, I think it comes more to me as words rather than the image itself.
I think that comes through in the prose, certainly. I really felt like it was quite sharp and to the point. It didn't dilly-dally about the place. I really liked the dialogue as well. It sounded, I don't know maybe if you hear the things in your head more than you see them, but the conversations flowed like real conversations. I really loved it, especially in a romance that's so important, obviously.
Yeah.
And like just to add to that, I think it's also the case like when they're in the farmhouse, safe house environment. I'm kind of walking around together, or like the idea that, oh, she's in this room or she's in this room. I think all of that flowed really nicely, because how do I phrase it? It's essentially the fact that you know that they're together, but there's that separation. And I think you played with that, or you used that really, really well. Because one of the things I wanted to add earlier is that although this is, like you say on the cover, like a romantic, suspenseful, like thriller novel, it doesn't, like Steve was saying earlier, when I started reading it, I didn't realize that it was a romance, like the romance wasn't it became a bigger part as the story went on, but it wasn't the main piece to the puzzle. The main piece to the puzzle was the actual, well, not the actual, but like the the fight, not the fight, but the I guess the fight with the
Are
magic.
you talking about the suspense story, like the
Yeah,
thriller
yeah,
element?
because there's two
the stalker.
storylines going on at once. And I found the suspense storyline kind of overarched everything, and it was really cool to see it all come together, and your use of language with everything, because of the way that you described the farmhouse and everything. It was really well done.
You.
It was certainly quite a vibe. So I said earlier that like tension was the underlying element, I thought, whether it be romantic or suspense. So author question, talk to me about building tension. I love tense books. I love like fast-paced, quite tense things. How do you build tension? What do you think's the
Oh, it's hard because it's something that you kind of, once you learn to do semi well, you kind of don't really think about it anymore. But I always start a book with the 3-act structure, which I know is kind of like dividing the writing community, but for the purpose of writing shorter works, I kind of needed that structure to fall on, where the problem is introduced and then there's a climax and a resolution. So I guess, it's just finding the balance between how I want the characters to develop in that dynamic and how external forces are going to kind of affect them going forward. It's and again, the vibes. I love writing vibey things. I love like kind of making things a bit gloomy and dark in instances, but then having those little glimmers of more lighter moments, and where they get to kind of feel a little bit better about themselves and a little bit more at home, and then ruining it for them. And giving it them back.
There was the scene with them where they get on the boat in the little pond, and it was just, it's exactly that. Like, you build them up and then you tear them down at times.
Yeah.
But even going forward to, I think they're at like a bed and breakfast or a little hotel.
I love the bed and breakfast.
Yeah, the little bed and breakfast, and the person who works there is just so lovely.
Yeah,
and it's just little things like that where it's like, why can't these side characters, why can't good also happen in this environment as well?
Yeah, I love introducing cozy side characters who don't really do much for the plot, but they're just there and they're having a great time.
And do you always put a really good dog in the book? Because I really like the dog in the book.
I love animals. I love putting animals in my books. There's quite a few now of my books that have animals in them, especially dogs.
Yeah, I think you can always tell when an author's either grown up with dogs or has dogs when they write good realistic dogs.
Yeah.
Well, that's really cool. Yeah, I think what you said about tension's right. The 3-act structure, I guess you've always got that part in the middle where it's like rising action, where things just keep going wrong for the character. Things go right, then go even more wrong. And I felt like for most of this book, I was kind of strapped to the front seat of the rising action. It kicked off pretty quick. I think it's the end of the first chapter where it all goes kind of bus crash. Yeah. And it all goes downhill from there. But again, having such a horrible thing happen in such a lovely location, like the farmhouse is, you don't need to tell me like specific details, but have you got like farmhouse experience? Because that felt like a real farmhouse.
No, I haven't. No.
I
live in an area around a lot of farms, but I've never personally lived on a farm or been on a farm. No. But I'm glad
it's a stove or a fireplace in a room. You got it that sorted.
Yeah.
Speaking of like the end of the first chapter in a bus crash, was that always the intention? Like when you wrote through the first draft, second draft, however many, was it always going to start off so bleak?
Yeah, I needed a reason for Ruby to get to the safe house. So I think the safe house was kind of the first idea that I had. Like, I wanted these characters to be stuck in a rural location and suffering. So yeah, I needed something. I wasn't sure it was going to be that wide scale until I kind of sat down and started writing it. And I also regret it because I really loved Ezra and I didn't want to kill him.
I was gonna ask, because Ezra has such a big influence throughout the entirety of the novel, but he only exists for like the first 10 pages. It's really, I think he did an incredible job with just how powerful and influential of a character you were able to write in such a short period of time.
Thank you. Yeah, I really
For
loved
me,
him.
I think what I loved most about Ezra was how you felt like, or I felt like there could have been just an entire other book about him and Ruby's like relationship
Yeah.
and everything that went into it and their friendship and everything before the book even started. And it's really tough to put all of that context onto a character within like a chapter space. But definitely when it spoiler alert for the first chapter of the book, if you haven't read it already. When Ezra dies at the end of the first chapter, I was like, oh, I was really looking forward to seeing how that developed. That's such a shame.
I know. I was sad about it myself. Also it just removes because I do sometimes take secondary characters and put them in another book. So the fact I can't do that with him now is quite sad.
Bring back my boy.
There's always prequels.
Yeah,
ghost stories.
I can do Ghost. I do some paranormal, so maybe he can come back as a ghost.
So you've written a bunch of other stuff, Rachel, as well. We've had first-time authors on here before, but I'm guessing Safe and Sound wasn't your first novel.
No, it wasn't. I think it would have been around 7 or 8 at that point.
Okay. Bloody hell.
Yeah.
Prolific then. So you don't just write romance suspense. Tell us about some of the other stuff that you write.
Well, my most recent release was Summer at the Scottish Castle, and that was a contemporary romance, queer characters again, set in Scotland, obviously.
Very nice.
And that's a mistaken identity type of situation between a Scottish gardener and a countess in hiding after a bad divorce. So
I kind of want to read this already, man.
That's one of my more kind of summary, not so
holiday
bleak ones. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, excellent. And are you working on something just now as well? Have you got something immediately in the works?
I am. I'm working on a cozy small town witch romance, a Sapphic one again, with lots of magic. It's set in the Yorkshire Dales, so it's close to home this time. Yeah. And again, lots of suspense and drama and angst.
But like witchy suspense and drama and angst.
Yeah, the witch style this time.
Man, these sound pretty good. I think you've definitely found a fan in me, and it's definitely not the kind of stuff that I would have thought I would have gotten into. But man, it was so nice, especially if you see the other interview with the other author that we do, Nadia. She wrote just the most harrowing, horrific series of events that ever happened to a person in novels, and it was such a bleak read. I loved it, absolutely loved it. That's why we're putting it in the box after all. But it was so harrowing. Then I read Safe and Sound after it, and it was like someone putting a blanket around me.
Yeah.
It was really good.
That's what I aim for, especially among queer readers as well, because as I said, we don't get the most comforting works all the time, but as more emerge, it's just nice to kind of, and as well, just everybody really, like, I think that's what romance is for, just giving people a little bit of an escape and a little bit of a warm hug. So if I can do that, then I've done my job right, I think.
Well, I think some writers, say that their job is to make people feel things. And if you've chosen to make people feel comfy, I think that's a very noble pursuit, especially in this day and age.
Yeah.
So you were speaking earlier about how you use the 3-act structure.
Yeah.
And so I normally don't ask authors this because I think everyone's a bit of a mix of both. You know what a planner or a pantser is, I'm guessing.
Yeah.
For those watching who don't know, that means whether you plot out your novel or whether you fly by the seat of your pants, hence the word pantser. So whereabouts do you fall on that?
I'm definitely in the middle. I like to have a structure ready to go, but my characters don't always listen to what I want them to do, and they go off on their own. So I have to kind of prepare for any changes. So I do leave the outline a little bit vague, but it's there.
Yeah, I think that's pretty much what I do as well. You've got a scaffold, and then when it comes to putting the meat on the scaffold, you find that the characters have got their own ideas.
Yeah.
About what they're going to do.
You never know.
I posted something the other day where I'm working on my next book just now, and I was 2 chapters from the finale, from the very end of it, and 2 characters decided to kiss, and I was like, hold on a minute, where'd that come from?
Yeah, I sometimes
I was like,
have
I need
the
to stop
opposite
reading
problem.
romance.
I sometimes have the opposite problem. For one of the last books that I wrote, they just wouldn't kiss for a really long time. So it was a mega slow burn by the end, even though it wasn't intended.
Not always a bad thing. Not always a bad
No,
thing.
you've just got to let them do it.
Exactly. They'll get to it in their own time.
Yeah.
That's interesting. So we were talking about what you think makes good tension, or what makes good, how you write tension properly. Switch it up to what your 90% DNA is made of. What do you think makes for a good romance?
Oh, I guess a lot of the use of tropes in the right way is a big thing at the minute for the sales wise, especially. But as well, just setting up a situation where you're invested in how these characters come together. And of course, it can't be like an immediate thing, or if it is, there needs to be something kind of keeping us interested in how the story will end through the way. And also just making fleshed out, interesting characters who you want to spend time with, whether they're with their love interest or away from them. Because at the end of the day, it's kind of like diving into a nicer version of the real world.
Yeah, very true. Especially when you're trying to write comfort.
Yeah.
I think I definitely got that, especially with Shay. Any scene that Shay was in, I was like, excellent. I'm enjoying this. This is good. Like Ruby's good as well, but Shay was funny. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I think it's also.
I think it's. Sorry.
No, I was just gonna say. I think it's also the way that all the characters kind of grew throughout the story. I mean, obviously, Liam had his moment where he was just kind of laying by a pond for a bit, but aside from him, you had Shay and Ruby, who really did kind of come into their own. Like, and then towards the end, they're like stealing a car together and all of this. It's cool to see them both incredibly outside of their comfort zone. And I have this conversation with friends a lot about like what makes a good friend, or like how do you bond the most with people. It's always, I find that you always end up bonding the most over terrible situations. Well, not terrible, but like, like you're in uni together and you're both complaining about XYZ and you end up getting much closer. And obviously this to the nth degree from that. So I think that's one of those tropes you played on really well, because you put them both in difficult environments and they really came together on their own with it.
Yeah. I think, just kind of setting up a situation where it isn't necessarily easy for them to kind of fall into each other's arms, but they get there in the end is always fun. And kind of just thinking how the characters are different from each other and how that can be like overcome through a romance as well.
Yeah, I really like how the girls both healed from something. It was the healing process. I think that's really cool as well. I know it's I think I've definitely read books before where the characters using romance to get over a trauma of some kind is really overplayed and a bit cheesy, and it just seems like a magic wand being waved. I never felt like that with these two. It didn't feel like they were like just brushing over everything. It was more that they were like they could understand each other.
Yeah.
Better once they opened up.
Yeah.
I learned a lot about writing romance when I was reading this book.
Oh, good.
Maybe
that's
it's
why
on the
cards.
Oh, perfect. So is there anything else that you'd like to plug, or that you do out with these books that you'd like us to drop a little mention for? We can always put links and stuff to in the bottom of the episode description.
I guess if you're interested in listening to my podcast, that would be nice. We're called Swords and Sapphics. It's me and my best friend Ivy, and we just talk about queer representation, especially women, and other representation in the media, and really just chatting about the kind of media we love. So it's very much like this format where we're just discussing things that we're enjoying at the minute.
Do you know what I did? I'm sure I saw you on Twitter posting something about a podcast, but even if I hadn't, I would have known looking at that microphone setup.
Yeah.
that looks pro. That looks professional.
Thank you.
I'm on a 10-year-old laptop. We ain't there yet.
That is super cool, though. Congratulations on the podcast.
Thank you.
I had a quick question going back to Safe and Sound real quick. Was there a specific inspiration you had for the management company or for Mason? Did somebody hurt you? Like
No,
Like a
nobody hurt
sausage
me.
story on.
I guess growing up, I was a big One Direction fan. And there was always this kind of discourse about how much their management was controlling them and
Yeah.
just how outside fans and things were affecting them. And of course they broke up and there was it got worse. So I guess that was kind of in the back of my mind. And just really from watching the way that like famous people in general are kind of handled as less than when they get successful, just the way that things are expected of them and just really the corruption of big companies and how it all works, I guess. Obviously this was an extreme example, but I kind of
I don't know, man.
kind of
You hear some real horror stories.
yeah.
It might feel like an extreme example, but I think that's the whole thing, is that it might feel extreme, but it's not really the most far-fetched. Like, I'm sure we've all read or heard about much worse happening. Like, people with power tend to do things that are in their best interest, even if at the expense of so much more.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
So
I don't
even
think it's that far-fetched, yeah, to the money people would have an artist repress their identity or misrepresent their identity in public for the sake of money.
Yeah.
I feel that's scarily accurate to a lot of it.
And
Yeah.
that was why, like, for me at least, that was why Ezra played such a big role. The fact that they were like at least publicly dating, but in reality they both had it. It's so heartbreaking to see, because I mean, obviously, I mean, personally, I don't know any celebrities, so I can't speak on that behalf. But you know, I couldn't imagine going through life not being able, you know, you can't go out and about, you can't do this, you can't do that. Like, sure, you might have all the money in the world, but at that point, what's the point if you have to lie about who you are and what you're doing?
Yeah. I mean, it's gotten to the point with me where I always feel guilty for even like liking people anymore, because like celebrities, because you hear so many stories about how controlled they are and kind of how awful it can be in the limelight. So I think it's always an interesting dynamic to explore.
I would agree. I think given how much we put them on pedestals, always like stories where you see behind the curtain a little bit. I feel like that's like, you know, readers like to be let into places that they wouldn't usually be let in.
Yeah.
So things like the music industry, the one you're working on just now, I guess, deals with like nobility, you know, like people who own castles. You've got a Dutch or a countess rather and stuff.
Yeah, yeah.
That's an interesting theme. I like that. We need to think of other weird industries that we can set Rachel Bowdler stories in.
I'm happy to do all of them.
Because you have quite a few books out. Do you have a setting that you come back to a lot? Do you have a setting that you absolutely love, or do you always try to change that?
A bit of both. Because I was writing so many like back to back, I kind of tried to flip between something that would challenge me more in that way, like Safe and Sound with more suspense or a different setting than what I'm used to. And then I would kind of go back to like a little cozy village where it's just an not easy to write, but kind of more comforting to write. And yeah, but at the minute I'm quite enjoying getting back to like writing in northern settings, because when I got my agent, I was writing a lot of like American based things because I just thought that was more marketable. And if it wasn't in America, it was like in the south of England. So it was really, but my agent's from Liverpool, so it was really nice to kind of hear that you should be writing, you can write northern characters, and it's a good thing to do that. So I'm enjoying that at the minute. Yeah.
That's funny. We were talking recently to a small indie press, I think.
Yeah,
Ryan, is it an Orthodox press who just do
Orthodox,
yeah,
from Manchester. Yeah.
Interesting. Speaking of agents and stuff, so this is something I really wanted to talk to you about, but Zoom's telling us we've got about 7 minutes left, so I'll get it in now. So you've been on both sides of the indie traditional publishing fence, am I right?
Yep.
tell us a little bit about what it's like on both sides. Do you have a preference? Have you found life easier or harder? Is there a difference that indie authors might not appreciate, or vice versa?
I think people don't realize how much work you do put in as an indie author, because it was really nice for me to like kind of take a step back when I was traditionally published. Someone else made the cover, someone else did all the editing and things like that, and I didn't have to like shell out more money for those things as well. And also just having the guidance from like my agent and the commissioning editor and things like that to tell me how to make my story better. But there is obviously a lot less control in the traditional space. For instance, I had to change a title of a book that I wasn't really set on, and I was concerned about how they were marketing my books as a queer author and how they was kind of putting that in straight spaces when I really wanted to reach a queer audience. So there's benefits of both and there's fallbacks of both. I guess it's just really what works for you and what matters most to you. I would like to continue both and see how it goes.
Interesting. I think definitely that what we've found talking to indie authors, especially who've been on both sides, is that the creative freedom is unparalleled.
Yeah.
But the challenge and potential to do it wrong is also unparalleled in indie. Whereas within traditional publishing, you're more limited, but there's more or less discomfort and uncertainty, certainly.
Yeah, I definitely got a lot more of an audience when I started traditionally publishing, and that the self-published novellas I have now are kind of my backlist, and they get more sales through the traditional publishing side. So I don't regret traditional publishing, and I would like to keep at it, but it's a industry that comes with a lot of issues and problems, and that can be hard to be part of sometimes.
I guess anything where there's already a pre-existing structure for how things work, try to come into that and be like, I'd like to do things my way. It's like, nope, there's a way that we do this and you've got to do it that way.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
But then it also does work. Like,
it does.
Those readers
that's the thing. They wouldn't do it if it didn't work. It's just
exactly.
Well, very true.
A lot of traditional publishers don't have the incentive to try anything new because why fix what ain't broken?
Yeah.
One more question about Safe and Sound real quick, because we've only got about 5 minutes left. Because you have a pretty wide catalog, a pretty large catalog of books that you've written, for somebody who really liked Safe and Sound, what would you recommend for them to read next from your catalog?
I would go with Saving the Star. It's a very similar vibe in that it's a bodyguard romance. The main character is a Hollywood actress. So it's kind of what you saw in Safe and Sound, but amped up to Hollywood level.
Nice.
Yeah.
Awesome. So thank you. Because I was just going through and there's so many of your stories I want to try. I just don't even know where to begin. So that's the next one. But I'm trying to think if there's any other questions I have. Like for me, I was actually wondering if you had any inspiration for Liam, because Liam was a character that I really, really enjoyed. And like you were saying earlier, like some of your characters jump from story to story. Is he one that you see in another story?
I did start planning a book for him, where he was kind of back on the force and in another case. I guess he came from a lot of like British crime drama styles, because you always kind of get that friendly officer who you can rely on a little
you think
bit
is dead.
Yeah. Who gets beaten up a lot and bruised a lot.
Yep.
So there wasn't a specific inspiration for him, but he definitely was a little bit of a mix of a lot of different British crime drama characters.
Fair. Well, thank you. No, that makes a lot of sense. And it was really nice to see the blend of all these different personalities, all these different backgrounds, because it seemed like him and Shay shared a background, but their personalities could not be more different.
Yeah.
And you really picked two polar opposites in Shay and Ruby, and it was really cool to see how they came together and how they came together in a way that really didn't feel forced. It wasn't like, oh, here it comes, it's gonna happen. you know, up until the end, like Shay's stubbornness, I really felt, I was like, all right, well, that's goodbye. On to the next thing. So it was really cool.
Oh, I was predicting all the ways it could go wrong.
Oh, yeah.
I was like, oh, she's got to go and see her ex and everything. Oh no, it's gonna go bad.
that was a really cool curveball that I didn't see coming.
I love throwing in an X every
Yeah.
so often.
Oh, it makes me so uncomfortable. I was like, oh, I
Yeah.
hate this. On like Shay's behalf, this is awful. It worked though.
Definitely worked, though. But you have could you please remind us what was the name of your podcast again?
Swords and Sapphics.
Swords and Sapphic, because we'll make sure that we get the links to everything. If people want to find you, is the best way on Twitter? Is the best way? Do you have a website?
Yep, I have a website. It's just rachelbowdler.co.uk. And I'm on all the social medias. Yeah.
Because we'll get links to all of those below as well. And yeah, so thank you again so much.
Thank you.
And this has been wonderful. And again, in case people forgot, we're sorry for the spoilers in the video. If you've managed to make it 40 minutes into an interview about a book you didn't read, go read the book. But this has been Safe and Sound by Rachel Bowdler, and thank you again.
Thank you.
I need to find.
Excellent. Then we'll see you soon again. Hopefully, Rachel. We'll stay in touch, and then we'll see what the future brings. I'll definitely be reading more of your books in the future. I'll pop you a message if you want to do.
Yeah. Yeah, feel free.
Excellent.
Thank you very much.
Until next time, have a good one.
Have a good day.